I'm going to go through this. This sort of topic gets quite complicated, it gets very technical very fast. I have tried to sort of minimize that, but we will be sending this slide out to you all afterwards, so you'll be able to revise or refresh, and my email can email me at any time. One time I ran this and a group of people had sort of half set up their thing and they emailed me and said, can you just come in and have a look at our setup and help sort of tell us what we might need, what else we need. And I just sort of went down to their building somewhere on campus and had a look. So we're totally free for communicating or asking any follow-up questions and anything like that. And if you've got anything to ask in the chat as well, feel free. So we'll get to terminology first up. So a podcast, in practical terms, it's an audio series consisting of a number of episodes, typically between 10 and 50 minutes long. That's not a hard rule. The runtime, kind of like with all the TV shows you watch nowadays on Netflix, there's no hard rule as to how long anything runs these days, because, you know, one of the most listened to podcasts in the world is the Joe Rogan Show, and every episode of that's about 3 hours long. Oh, beautiful, sorry, yes. And every episode is about 3 hours long, and so you know, the running time is never sort of set, but between 10 and 50 minutes is a nice sweet spot where the majority of podcasts sort of do. They're hosted on a very decentralized system, and Apple Podcasts, which is what most people sort of experience podcasts through, that's sort of like the hub of everything, but a lot of people have started using other sorts of apps. But Apple Podcasts is generally the central thing, and then all of your other applications that you use to listen to podcasts, whether on your iPhone or on your computer, they'll reference Apple Podcasts and pull from there, so that's usually the first spot to go. An audio file can be placed anywhere and may not be specific, so that's not by definition a podcast. And a podcast is made up of audio files, but an audio file is not necessarily a podcast. Anyway, so what is in a podcast? So you've got interviews, history, investigative journalism, blogs, chat shows, game shows. I've even heard an audio game show once that was very strange, but fascinating. You've got cultural commentary, narrative. Narrative is a big thing in podcasts at the moment. That's like your stories. With the old school radio dramas have made a bit of a comeback through podcasts. And the thing is that there is a podcast for almost any topic you can imagine. So I've just put 3 up here on this slide that are fascinatingly specific. There is a podcast called Stone Clearing with Richard Herring, and he walks around various fields and public lands, and he clears the stones off this place as he talks on his podcast, and that's the podcast. And it's a reasonably big hit. There's one about French weddings in particular, just specifically weddings in France. And then this one, which is Whatever Happened to Pizza at McDonald's, which is an investigative piece about how McDonald's used to serve pizza and then didn't, and where that went. So if you can imagine it, there's usually a podcast for it, which is really fun. So some are made by media companies and others are just by individuals on their own, done in their, you know, recorded in their lounge room or inside their wardrobe. And some have advertising, some don't. Most of you will be familiar with sort of some of the bigger podcasts if you've ever sort of downloaded or listened to any of them. A lot of them are driven by having like a celebrity host. The Conan O'Brien one is a big one, or the Joe Rogan one that I mentioned before. But you can have anything, and podcasts it's a bit of a democratic space in terms of some random podcasts can really just find a hit. There's famously that one called Serial, which some of you might know, which I believe pull up in the next. Oh no, not yet. So the how. So the processes and skills needed for making a podcast are all to do with audio recording, audio production, and audio post-production. So although video has started actually having a bit of an uptick lately, so I'll touch on that in a little bit. Finished episodes are broadcast on the web, and there's a small number of ways that that happens. And so that's usually the part that a lot of people are less familiar with, especially if they've got like a really cool idea and they've got the great guests and they might even have audio equipment, but then how do you get it out into the world is generally the question a lot of people have. So we'll go into a couple of ways of that in just a bit. So artwork, this is a good place to start. If you're like, where should I go with my podcast? I've got this really cool idea, kind of know, but I want to know, artwork's a really good place because it's sort of like your branding, UQ has its branding, any institute has its branding, and that sort of sticks with the creative output. It's the way that people familiarize themselves with it. So simple pictures are generally a bit better than lots of small text. So here I've got for the one on the left, Ghosts of Boyfriends Past, is run by a couple of friends of mine. And it's a dating advice show. So, you get the idea from the image pretty quickly. And there's a lot of stock image sites that you can sort of just search through free stock images. There's a site called Pexels, Pexels, which is a really good pexels.com, and they have just totally free to use Creative Commons pictures, and you can find a lot of strange stuff. Just stick it in a Photoshop, do a little bit of editing, change the colors, make it your own, and then put your title there. Serial, as I mentioned, it was one of the most successful podcasts of all time, and the artwork's really, really, really simple. The thing with podcasts, people are sort of inclined to put faces and people on it, but you think about when you're listening to it, you're looking at it on like your iPhone or your iPod. I think I have an iPod here, and it's very, very tiny, and the podcast picture is very, very tiny inside of that, and so people's faces don't really register that importantly in that frame, unless of course you've got Conan O'Brien or something like that. But then even then, I believe it's like his iconic hair profile that he does. So even Conan O'Brien's like make it a bit more artsy. And then these other two in the middle, this one's sort of self-explanatory, the movies that made me, the film canister. And then the one on the Carrier, that's one of those narrative podcasts I was mentioning before. It's sort of a story, so it's trying to evoke a little bit of mystery. And it's got a very, very famous actress in the lead. Well, now she's Oscar nominated. She's the lead in Wicked, if anyone went and saw Wicked recently. But, even then, with a famous sort of actor, they're like, no, let's just have a nice, evocative image to sell the show. So video podcasts, I mentioned this before. There's a lot of podcasts that are kind of delivered as video in addition to the audio only. So videotaping is usually done live. So they're recording it as is. They set up their recording equipment, and then they'll just put some cameras in the room where they're going. It can get tricky when you're dealing with multiple cameras. Some people just have one wide camera sitting on there, and they'll just, crop in if they need to sort of close up on someone. But depending on the quality of your camera, sometimes that can be a bit, that can be a bit cumbersome, especially if you're not familiar with video editing. But that being said, it does seem to be, because I was just on a website earlier today that there was something about like a 17% uptick in people who are engaging with podcasts exclusively through videos. So that's where the trend is going, I guess, and a lot of them are winding up on Instagram Reels, and pieces on TikTok are usually done to bring people to the podcasts. It's often used one way or the other. So the video is used to drive audiences to subscribe to the podcast in audio format, or the podcast is used to make people subscribe to the YouTube channel, for instance, if you're dropping it on YouTube. Videotaping is often best used for the more conversational shows. You would have seen like chat shows or morning breakfast radio that's become a podcast, and they film it because usually there's a famous guest that they're talking to. The reactions are a little bit more desired, as far as, the guest is describing something which doesn't really work well in an audio format, but they can just sort of gesture in the video. So it's a growing sort of trend. Something as simple as setting up your iPhone sometimes just in the corner of the room, if you're doing a general chat show, making sure you can see everyone, and then just putting it up there. And for example, if you're putting it on YouTube, and you just link to the podcast in your comments, and then hopefully ideally driving people to that platform. Oh, sorry, did someone ask a question? Elisa? Oh, okay. I thought someone was asking a question. And as Tanya noted as well, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat as well, and we'll be able to follow up on them as we go through. So podcast workflow. Planning the session is always key. So even if you're doing a chat show, even if it's an interview, even if it's something that you're not specifically scripting, so for example, you're not reading out a lecture in a podcast format or something like that, planning your session is always key. I find, I've interviewed, I do a podcast outside of work just for funsies, about television shows that got cancelled after one season. And I've had the very, very good fortune to interview, I've interviewed Mike Royce, who is an executive producer on Everybody Loves Raymond, as an Emmy winner. I was like, and even then, and they're going to be really good people to talk to, and they'll have done the interview sort of thing. But if you have a plan, you can always throw it out. But what you don't want is to need a plan while you're in the middle of talking to someone really famous. You're never going to get to talk to you again, because they're so busy. You found them one slot. You want a plan. Setting up the equipment. Pretty self-explanatory. I'll go through some equipment. I'm not 100% sure. I'm able to control it when I get it to Zoom, or is it kind of locked?
I don't know how to zoom in.
No, okay. I'll see. Maybe does yours have a camera on it?
I can put the camera on.
Okay, yeah, beautiful. We might try and set up at Tanya's computer to get a little bit of a closer look at this equipment I've brought in, which we'll run through in a little bit. So recording your content and receiving any of the files recorded. So most audio recorders will come with SD cards or micro SD cards, and you've got to make sure your file management is on point, because that's a big problem, especially if you're doing like a high volume effort where you're doing something where you're recording a lot of different pieces there. You've got an interview here and you've got some, just explanation, you're talking through a piece of pre-written sort of something, and then you've got a casual chat, for example, and you're mixing them all together. Your file management is going to be very, very key. So for whatever system you have, plan it at the top and then just apply it to every episode. I think when I did my show's called One Season Wonders, and I have like a template folder that's got the project set up, and then I have a different project for every episode, just because it's easier to go in and edit that rather than having a project with 50 episodes inside of it, and then you're trying to just scramble through. If you just know the exact episode that's in your folder, but whatever sort of folder management system you have, employ it at the top rather than sort of figuring it out after the fact. And I don't know if anyone's used audio editing or video editing software, but a lot of times they'll have a bit of a conniption if you move files around after the fact, and then it can't link to them because they're always referencing a dozen different files. So having it all set up at the beginning means that nothing will sort of get thrown out if you have to change stuff. Copying the files to your computer, so that's part of the file management. The editing the files, so there's a few audio editors that you can use. There's the stock ones, there's Windows Media Maker, I think it's called. I haven't used that one in a very long time, so it might be something different. Apple has some default editors, or you can move up to some of the more sophisticated ones. So Adobe has both Adobe Audition, which is an audio exclusive editing system, and then you can often use some of your video editors just to straight up edit audio only. Adobe Premiere is a go-to one. A lot of people attempted to do Adobe Rush, but I believe it doesn't do audio only, so you will have to sort of step up into Premiere. I'll do a little run through of the software of Adobe Premiere, just showing you a base sort of little workflow. But it can get, the learning curve on some of those more sophisticated softwares is quite high and get a little bit complicated. So we will link you to a couple of tutorials as well. I think we have them at the end of the slides as well if you want to watch and just have a go and play. I believe if you staff have Adobe licenses to use the software, yes. So you will be able to get that and have a play around on it, even if you've never touched it before. It might always be useful. Polishing the edit, so this is where you add all your effects, record any fixes, do little changes, little edits. You'd be surprised how often you can get away with replacing a word here or there with a word from somewhere else, or stitching two things together because you had a bit of a giggle fit in the middle of an interview and you can stitch together seamlessly. There's a lot of things you can get away with in editing. And then exporting and uploading to a podcast host or Blackboard or SoundCloud, wherever your sort of platform is. Most platforms will have a detail of what their ideal settings are. So that'll often help you when you're doing your export, especially if you don't know things about bit rate or kilobits a second or all of that. They'll usually have a list of, we want it in this, and you can just go on to whatever you edited in, make sure all your settings match, and then you should be good. So planning your session, so right up front, it's always good to define the goal of your show and the audience. Is it just for the general public? Is it 3-year vet students, scientists in the field? The audience will often determine the level of what you're investigating, the type of guests you're getting, all of that. Writing the precis for the episode, which is a word I discovered doing this course, and I was like, I'm going to throw that in there. It's very pretentious, but I like it. Sometimes this can be a question you want to answer. So, for example, my podcast I do about the television shows, I have a bit of a strict format. I have, there's like a little teaser. We go into my intro about that's sort of the regular, welcome to One Season Wonders. This is the show where we look at all of the Voss TV and come and join us, like an intro for a TV show. They'll have, in house, they'll have the patient collapses, then they go into the intro and then they go into the main episode. People love that sort of format. And then I delve into the history of a particular television show, how it was born, any production stories, and then I get up to the point where it gets cancelled, and then I put in an interview with the creator, or I've talked to a couple of creators, I've talked to some editors, or writers, screenwriters, and we talk with them in an interview. It's usually about 15-20 minutes is what I sort of book them in for. And then at the end, I look at where they've all gone after the show finished. So they're sort of like, because if you put your interview up the top, people might be tempted to listen to the interview and then stop listening to the rest of the show. So you kind of want to put the juicy part somewhere where it's going to entice people to keep listening or to listen to the whole thing. Because retaining an audience for the duration of a particular episode is often the trick. So I have a big plan that I follow pretty much to a T. But if you're doing something a little bit more freewheeling, so for example, if you're just an interview and you don't necessarily know what they're going to respond like, I usually write down bullet points. I usually write down my questions and send it to them beforehand, especially with, TV shows. These ones, they worked on it for a year and it was 10 years ago. Often they're looking to refresh their memories about what happened on their shoots. So I send them the questions beforehand, but if you're doing something a little bit more, I guess, hard-hitting, you maybe don't want to do that, but I generally tend to find if you're pre-sending your interview questions in, the interview always goes very, very smoothly. And then what happens is while you're recording, just have a little notepad beside you and you can be writing like follow-ups as they think of them. I'm very bad with if I don't say something as soon as I've thought it, I forget about it. So I have to write it down as soon as I'm thinking about it. I always keep a little blank notepad next to me during the interviews so that if I have any follow-ups, I can just do that. But when you're planning a list of people you might want to interview, if it's a particular topic, you want to touch on different aspects or different stakeholders. You want to, if you're looking at some sort of project, do you want to look at the financing side and then the application side, all that kind of thing. Listing the people you might want to interview and then gathering their contacts, sending out general queries to them. I find the problem with my podcast is often the people are very, very busy because they're already working on another TV show on the schedule. They're doing like 18-hour days, 7 months of the year. So getting in early with people you want to interview, and even if they need to record their interview really early, but you haven't got the bits around your episode, you can always record that interview on its own and then do your other bit later and then edit it all together and it'll sound like you planned it all from the beginning. Gathering facts and statistics, especially if it's an area that you're not familiar with, a piece of, a certain subject, make sure you're very well versed in the topic or you have someone who is very well versed in the topic. There's nothing more going to encourage people to turn off more than it's an expert going, oh, I really am fascinated by etymology, and then they listen to an etymology podcast and the person doesn't know what the hell they're talking about. Instant, unsubscribe, because there's so many podcasts out there. To make yourself stand out, the quality is generally actually a really big part of what encourages people to keep listening and subscribe. And writing a skeleton script is also really good in rough order. For my history of the TV show section, I literally write out every word I say and I read it. And the tapes are often used to try and make it sound like I didn't just script the hell out of it and make it sound a little bit more natural and conversational. But writing the script out, even for you I used to do a general chat show with 3 friends. We just talked about movies and TV. It was not revolutionary in the slightest. The most common type of podcast there is three guys talking about movies, but I had a general plan for the episode. We had a topic we were going to cover. I wrote some dot points, some questions to ask them, and to keep it going, to keep you on track. So even if it's a very casual podcast, the plan is always a good idea. Setting up your equipment. So your equipment can be anything from, you can often, phones these days are getting very, very good. iPhones especially have got a lot of different sort of settings, and there's a lot of apps that'll help you. They're like boutique apps for sound recording that'll let you kind of go into a bit deeper settings on your phone and change some things around. We have something called a Zoom recorder.
You got a meeting.
Well, I'm just checking. I do equipment walkthrough, but there's a Zoom recorder, so a little something like this. I'll show you in a little bit more detail a little bit later, which is a sort of a step up from your phones. It's a little recorder, but it's not particularly expensive. And then you have these bigger devices like you're seeing people sort of. Oh, there we go. So if everyone wants to pin Tanya's computer there, I'll just show you real quick. And if you want to come here, so there we go. Pin Tanya's email. So this is a little Zoom recorder. This is like a step up. So this will put you back about $300. But it's got these inputs here. You can, inputs here, you can stick your microphone in there, but it also has its own built-in microphones along the top. So that would be something you could just sit in your room, sit on a little stand and talk. You can aim one at you, one at the other. And it records onto an SD card. That's probably a little bit too small to see. It'll just record on an SD card. It's got a few settings you can change and set via the menus, but it's generally a mostly point and shoot sort of deal. Multi-microphone setup. So this is those more sort of sophisticated things. It's like a control board, and it sort of looks like what you'd see in a radio station. This is Rode Podcaster. It's specifically made for podcasting. It's such a booming industry that everyone's like, yes, you gotta get this. So this one will let you plug in 4 microphones along here, and it has all sorts of, you've got the levels. These buttons here are for sound effects. You can have the wah wah, or you can do like the shock jock style, humorous sort of things. Italy has a loaner setup. I'll just double check which one that is. We do sometimes loan out like the Zoom recorders and the Rodecaster, depending on its availability, with some microphones. But we'll have an email you can contact if you want to try any of that sort of stuff out. You can even just email and say, hey, can we come in on a particular time, whatever, just to try out the equipment, see how it goes. Just send an email to, we'll have an address that pops up at the end of this. So, just go back to the slides. An important word about microphones. See if I can demonstrate this at the table. So, there's no such thing as a magic microphone. If you're not putting it in the proper place as you record, it's not going to make a difference whether or not you bought a $1,000 microphone or a $50 microphone. In fact, the microphones I use for my podcast, I bought them, they're little condenser mics. They basically look like when a singer is on stage and they have, the microphone with the little round head. I bought $79, got me 3. And they work a treat. They are absolutely beautiful to use. So there's no such thing as a magic microphone. Generally, one podcaster to one microphone. Famous last words are just, I'll just put the microphone in the middle of the room and everyone can be heard on it. But that will sound like you've put a microphone in the middle of the room. It'll have a lot of echo like you can hear here via the microphone, I think, which has come up on the camera or wherever the microphone that is recording me from. So, no matter how much you spend on a microphone, if you don't learn how to use it, it's going to sound bad. And proximity is the most important thing. So you have this diagram here, and it's a really good rule of thumb. So if you're recording at a desk, for example, I'm just going to sit here to demonstrate. It's always good to sit where you're comfortable, then bring the microphone to you, Because if it's out here and then you sit there and then you're gonna lean in, you're gonna lean out, and you're kind of gonna get this kind of effect going on. So sit where you're comfortable, bring the microphone to you. And we've got this little diagram, this gentleman here has got the 4 fingers. You place it, I don't see me there, 4 fingers, and you place it there. And that's about a nice sweet spot. What you want to do is generally, if you've got like a microphone like this that's aimed and very directional, pointing it at your chin rather than in your mouth, because if it's in your mouth, every time you go shirt, you're going to get all that sound that you've heard on a lot of audio recordings. So if you're pointing it at your chin and then you're talking to someone across from you, all of your the wind from your voice, that's what generally makes it. All the wind from your voice is going to be going over the microphone, but it'll catch all your sound. Sometimes even if you want to put it around the side, so it's the same kind of position, but generally around the side, especially if you've got like a piece of paper in front of you or notes that you're reading off of. If you move it around to the side, that way you don't have to worry about that wind going there and making it sound a bit distorted. So proximity is the big important thing. If you're too far away from it, it's going to pick up all of that echoey sort of stuff. If you're too close, it's going to start blowing out and being really, really loud. Some microphones, like some of those radio microphones that hang down, they can get pretty close to them, but those are really, really, really expensive microphones. So most of the stuff that's within a normal person's budget is going to be a bit sensitive to being too loud. And they're not going to have the boards or the mixers, like, paid professionals operating a board, mixing things as you record. So that's a generally good rule. So sit where you're comfortable, bring the microphone to you, do the hand test, the 4 fingers, and pointing it towards your chin. And that's going to get you like 99% of the way, pretty much every time. So, signal to noise. This is where it starts getting a little bit technical. So signal is the good stuff, basically, in sound mixer, sound editing terms. So we might go back to it eventually when I'm running this recorder, but I think it's the next slide overall. So signal is the good stuff. Signal is everything you want, and noise is what you don't want. So what you want to do is you want to maximize the signal and minimize the noise. And you can do that through proximity is one of them. Thinking about your space as well is a really good idea. So as you can hear here, this is quite echoey, this room, because it's got a lot of hard surfaces. If you've ever gone into a sound recording booth somewhere and they have like egg carton looking things or styrofoam, that's usually just to stop the sound from bouncing everywhere. A good test if you're in a room and you're like, oh, I can't tell, is to give it a little bit of a clap. And if you can kind of hear the clap trail off afterwards, it's going to be a very echoey room and not ideal for recording. Or if it is, you need to do some modifications to it. Some people I know some friends who put a big sheet over them in the microphone. That works great. Recording in the back seat of your car is actually shockingly very good for noise. And I had some friends who they did audio recording for animation voiceovers, and they just went in their wardrobe. They sat in their wardrobe with a little laptop on a little stand and recorded it, and all of the clothes muffled the noise. So minimizing noise is basically the ideal. There's a tip, if you're recording like at a table, sometimes if you put a blanket on the table, the sound will stop bouncing off the table quite as much. That's another really nice little tip there. Setting levels. So this is just taken from Adobe Premiere, but most recorders will have little level markers that look like this. They'll either be vertical or they'll be horizontal. And there's basically a Goldilocks sort of thing. You don't want to be too high. Most of the recorders have this sort of red marker along the top or along the side. If you hit that, it has peaked. And you'll have seen when in videos on YouTube or on the internet, someone screams and the audio kind of just cuts out, has this weird cut, kind of rough, scratchy sound to it. That's peaking. We don't want that. That basically means the sound is so loud that the information has gone beyond what the microphone can pick up, and that information's lost you. No matter how good you are at editing, you can never get that sound back. Doubly so, if you record too low, this is a bad signal to noise ratio because you'll have to increase the volume so that it sits at a normal rate. And if you increase the volume of the signal, you'll be increasing the volume of the noise at the same time, because all these audio effects can only be applied to the whole sound file. So when you boost it up, you'll hear all of the atmosphere, you'll hear the air conditioning going, you'll hear the cars outside, you'll hear the fan that you've got turned on because it's too hot while you're recording. All those sort of stuff you will hear. It's easier to have it and then to try and get it clean as possible, on the first recording, and the less work you have to do in post, the better the quality is going to be. Because you can do a couple of things to decrease noise, but the overall quality is going to be better if you can get it as clean as possible straight up. So this sort of Goldilocks level between -12 and -16, if you're looking at audio levels, is the Goldilocks level. It's just right. If it doesn't have the actual numbers there, sound is in like a logarithmic thing. I won't go into the maths of it, which is why it's all in negative values. It's just, so -12, -16 is basically somewhere in the realm of about 3/4 up, somewhere in that third quarter is generally a really nice sweet spot. And that goes true with your other recorders. I'll show you on the Rode device. It doesn't have the numbers, but it has the limits, and it'll have the little red markers. I believe equipment walkthrough. So I'm just going to turn. If you want to do it, I guess something. I'll show you a little bit of how it works. Very interesting to see how. So let's see if we can do it. So I mentioned before you have the Zoom recorder. Much like this, it'll just have a really simple display and the audio levels will run. So this doesn't have any batteries in it at the moment. I do apologize. It takes a while to start up sometime, but it basically has a record. Sorry, let's pull that a little bit closer. There's a record button. There's the playing buttons, the various channels for the microphones. This is technically a 4-channel piece because it has 2 microphones at the top and 2 inputs down the bottom. But generally, you're either dealing with that or you're dealing with that. You don't often deal with all 4 at once. And it basically is, there's like a little, hopefully you can see that one. Beside there, there's a record level function. That's just changing, that's sort of like, that's acting like the bars on this, where you're changing the record level of your microphone. You also have, I'll just show you real quickly, if you don't have a fancy recorder, you want to do it in your laptop. Laptop microphones suck, as you can tell from the quality of my voice on this over here, but often you can get a little USB microphone, something like this. It just plugs in via USB, and it is very good quality. Like all things considered, the affordability of this kind of tech got really, really cheap when Zoom kicked in as like a really popular method during the pandemic. Microphones, when I remember trying to buy my mother a microphone, she's a piano teacher, and she needed a microphone and a webcam, and they were sold out everywhere. So they're very popular and they're quite affordable now, after that sort of boom in the purchasing power. And something like this will just plug into your computer, and generally you tell it, record off of this. So you can do that in Zoom. We've had a couple of people come in and do their interviews via Zoom. And so you just plug it in, you go into Zoom, you make sure it's recording, and you just set your audio device to say record off of this particular microphone, and it'll have a brand name. In this case, it's called a Blue microphone. And this just has a simple volume on it, a volume control on it, and a mute button, if you so desire. This is a little bit more of a sophisticated podcasting. It's actually made from, again, this is a Rode podcast mic. So it's made specifically for the activity of people generally chatting and talking about podcasting. So most of it's sort of protection, the housing, all of that sort of, it's almost a plug and play kind of deal, especially if you've got a recorder like this. Got my wires all tangled up. Especially if you've got a recorder like this. So you can see that as well. Yep, beautiful. So what you can see here is you've got the microphone here, and I've got the audio recorders there. I've only plugged in one microphone, so I'll turn everything down except that, and you can see got this little marker here. So if this was our recording level right now, that's a bit too low. That's kind of hitting down here in the lower third of it. We want that 3/4 mark, so we just pull up the lever, and getting it to about there. So this is me talking now. So I'm just gonna see if I can see that at all. This is me talking now, and that's hitting pretty nicely at that 2/3 level. So we know it'll be good. Ideally, when you're recording, you'll have a set of headphones to listen to. You kind of want the over-ear headphones just because they'll block out the noise so that you can generally tell exactly what you're recording versus just the noise in the general room. You'll have felt that sort of thing if you've been recording listening to someone speaking on headphones while they're speaking in the room, and there's that weird feedback thing. So the less you can hear of the outside world, the better it'll be. And then you've got headphone controls on here that's the other thing you've got to watch out, and that's why the audio levels are really important, because if this is all the way down here, but I have my headphone levels up, it's going to sound really loud to me in my ears, but we're recording a really, really tiny level. So always keeping your eye on the recording levels. Now I'll just show you really quickly. This has there we go, that's the glare. You can see it tapping and it's going red up the top there. That means it's peaked. That means something's gone wrong. So always keeping your eye out for that. Always monitoring while you're recording is also very important, whether by ears or by looking at the graphs. This device, it does look quite complicated, but it's all things relatively simple. It just has a nice record function there. You hit record, it goes red, it's recording. Hello, my name is Shane, and this is the podcast about podcasts. Press stop. I'm going to see if I can. We might not be able to hear. Sorry, that's a bit of feedback coming in there. Just going to see if I can turn it up quite loud. And we'll go and play what we just recorded. Okay. Record, goes red, recording. Hello, my name is Shane, and this is the podcast about podcast. So, that's just a very lame example, but that's it's about how simple it is. And this one records onto micro SD cards. They're these very, very, very tiny SD cards. They go in the back, and so you often need like an adapter of some kind, because a lot of computers don't even read regular SD cards these days. So you need some sort of adapter. There's usually a big SD card that the little one will sit in, or there's multi-card readers. It'll depend entirely on what computer you have and what computer you're working on. A recorder like this lets you sort of adjust effects and things. So if I hit the channel I'm dealing with, so channel 1 is my microphone that's currently plugged in, and it will give you sort of settings. So you can do a couple of effects and things here. There's things called compressors, high-pass filters. All that's a little bit more complicated than what we'll run into today, but the advantage with a sophisticated device like this is it can do a lot of that effects for you, so you don't have to do it all when you bring it into the computer. It's got microphone. So this one has, because this is made specifically for podcasting, you can see it there, it has some presets. You can tell which Rode microphone you've got particularly plugged in, or you can just tell it a general condenser or dynamic. Different microphones are called different things, but if you're going to buy some, they'll also have it on the box, so you'll be able to know pretty easily. About voice, tone strength, it's just various audio processing sort of things and your audio levels. That's pretty much the nuts and bolts. Anything more specific, I think it'll depend on which device you're specifically working with. But if you want a closer look at this one, feel free to send an email to us, and you can come in and have a look at the setup and see how it works for you. I think we generally have a focus on student-facing stuff, but my boss Tim will be able to run you through what we're able to do or what we're able to loan out and all that kind of thing. We are in the middle of producing some podcasts for an academic that are working out quite nicely. So I think that's pretty much that. Just turn that off. Right here, next slide. How's everyone going? Anyone got any questions so far?
There was a question.
Sorry.
There was a question on.
Oh, there was?
Yeah.
Cool.
I like to wait till we turn this off then.
Oh, yes, sorry.
So Shane, the question is from John. Many podcast hosts interview someone in another location. Is it good enough to record the audio interview using Zoom, making sure both interviewer and interviewee have a microphone headset plugged into their desktop?
Yes, this is a very good question. So, because I deal with it all the time, I've interviewed most of the people I've interviewed have lived in America, except for I interviewed a producer from Doctor Who, so he was off in England. Um, uh, Zoom is generally pretty good. The thing you have to keep an eye out with Zoom is it has a lot of settings turned on automatically in order to clean up audio so that when you're having a meeting, it's not terrible, you can't hear a dog barking, all that kind of stuff. Generally speaking, if you're using the audio recorded off of Zoom, you want to turn those settings off. See if I can actually, I wonder if I can share my screen and share Zoom. I'll just show you for a second. If I share, I'll just share my whole desktop. That way you can sort of see. So I'm in, you can see that? Yeah. So I'm in Zoom. Where are we? Settings. Settings. So under where are we? The audio, you can turn off some of these settings. So there's automatically adjust microphone volume, but generally what you want.
No, I don't think we're seeing the
Oh,
same.
are you not seeing
thing.
this?
No.
Oh, sorry. What am I doing? I think because I'm trying to show Zoom that it's like it doesn't want to show itself. You just stop the share and then see if I can share again. Share. I wonder if because it is Zoom, can you see that now? No.
we're not seeing the same.
I think it's because it is in Zoom. What I might be able to do is I'll send in the follow-up email, I'll send through a screenshot of the settings in Zoom. So generally what you do is you're turning off a bunch of settings. There's sort of, I think they have a default setting that says prioritize like quality for audio editing or something like that, and that will sort of turn off a lot of those automated settings. I'll just go back to sharing my screen.
Okay, thank you very much, Shane. That's really helpful if you can send those. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's some settings like that, but some people might not have access to a fancy microphone. A pro tip is, you know those little Apple headphones that have the microphone attached to them? Very, very good, surprisingly good quality that comes from them. So ideally avoiding your laptop microphone at all times, but if you can't, you generally just will have to sort of do a little bit more heavy audio editing. There's a couple of like Adobe Premiere has sort of integrated, it's a little bit clunky at the moment, they're still sort of revising how it works, but there's sort of it's almost like a make it sound good button, which has always been the thing that people said doesn't exist. It's sort of like that, but it's sort of, at the moment we found it's crashing our computers upstairs where we work, and we work on pretty high powered computers, so it's still in, Adobe is still figuring it out, but you would put the audio down, you'd say, it's called Voice Enhancer, I think is what they call it, Adobe Voice Enhancer. And you hit the button and you can sort of adjust some of the settings as you go. Eventually that'll probably be a much easier thing to do, I think, because they're integrating AI stuff into it to make it all work and work smoothly. But so generally, get the audio as nice as possible. If they can be in a quiet place, sometimes that's better than nothing, even if they don't have a fancy microphone or whatever. And if there's a dropout audio because of lag, sometimes you just get them to say that particular sentence again. You can always just edit that sentence in there where it dropped out. So when you're dealing with people who don't necessarily have a lot of the nice equipment, you often have to make do with what you can. But I think audiences have become a lot more forgiving since the pandemic of quality of audio, of quality of video, because they understand that, you know, that's just how the tech works sometimes. And on top of that, sometimes it's, you know, the only way to get a hold of a certain expert in some faraway place. The audience are kind of going to accept, well, this is really rare and expert knowledge over, well, I prefer it to be really nice quality, but it's not as much of an expert kind of thing. So audiences can generally be a little bit more forgiving of that kind of thing these days, I've found. But just if you're getting them to a nice, quieter location, some sort of a microphone that's not just the built-in one in the laptop does a pretty good job, I've found. Is that coming through? Yeah, beautiful. So recording your session. So try and find the quietest place you can to record to. Quietest place for you is also really good. I talked about the testing how live a room is by clapping your hands and seeing the echo. If you're solo, the best place for recording under your Arduino, like we mentioned. Zoom recordings are fine. So I think this is the saying, it's high quality, so it won't do any of its auto processing. It won't do any of its auto processing and recording locally, so you don't want to go onto the cloud. Ideally, you've got the files on your computer. It does take some time, so once you finish your particular interview, it'll have this bar that creeps and it takes like 45 minutes to process it, but it's always worth it keeping it on your computer rather than the cloud. Because the last thing you want is a very, very rare interview with some very hard to get expert and you've lost it or you don't have access to it because the internet's down or something like that. Thinking of the edit while you're recording is also really good. If you're thinking, so if you're running an interview, and we just had this happen with a project that we've been working on where they ran the interview went really well, the expert was really good, but the interviewer wasn't really happy with how he'd asked his questions. You can always record that later. You can always re-record that and dub it over. You know, it can get into some weird area. You can change your question fundamentally and then have the answer be completely different. But it's good to know that you can change your questions afterwards. So when you're in the interview, the most important thing is always the rarest thing, the thing you can't get again, which is generally your subject that you're interviewing. And it'll also often help you for going down later episodes. So I've always found, you know, when I did my first chat show podcast, the first couple of episodes are very rough, and kind of trim things down, but as we went on, I had to do that less because you were used to it, you're used to how you're recording, and all of that. Monologue tips, so this might be what you're looking for, talking about voice sort of things. So finding your performance voice, strong confidence, slow pace. A lot of people have the ability now to listen to podcasts at any speed that they want, and a lot of students on platforms like LearnX and Blackboard, they can change the speed of the videos anyway. So your best bet for like a speed you're talking, lot slower than I'm talking now. I have a bad habit of talking very fast. I have to slow it down when I talk. But a nice measured pace. You're talking about that newsreader tone. Sometimes that might work, but on podcast it can sound a little strange. So you just want something that's a little bit more heightened. It's not quite conversational, unless that's the style of your podcast. Painting a picture with words. So always remembering that you're in an audio format. So if you're talking about, oh, this looks so amazing, you know, the audience are going to be like, well, I can't see it. What are you talking about? So always thinking in terms of an audio for first, even if you've got the video component, keeping an audio. I find there's a couple of podcasts I listen to, just a couple of chat shows, and they often go into tangents on something in the room. I'm like, well, I have to go to YouTube now to skim through that hour and 10-minute video, find the section to hear what they're referring to. So keeping the fact that it's audio is part of your audience in mind, because if they're watching it on video, they're not going to be bothered by something that's described as audio, but if they're on audio and you cannot see what's being described, that might be an issue. Being concise, so don't be afraid to script detailed or complicated sections and ad lib around them, especially if you've got some very important fact-based sort of material. On the performance voice, so I find, I'll see if I can put it on a web. I've just been talking for a while. Having water with you is very, very important. You'll be shocked at how dry your throat can get after just 10 minutes of trying to record yourself doing a monologue. But I generally have it's a little bit bouncier. It sort of goes, I'll see if I can do my, welcome to One Season Wonders. My name is Shane Anderson. This is a show about TV we left behind. No, wait, I'm doing this horribly wrong. Hi, my name is Shane Anderson, and this is One Season Wonders, a show about the TV we left behind. Cancelled after only a single season, sometimes less. Hundreds of creatives worked there, and so on and so forth. So it has this little, it's a little bounce, it's a little slower, and you emphasize words. That's usually what I'm trying to do, is emphasizing certain words, especially if you've got an information-heavy podcast. Links, so if you've got multiple different subjects, linking short pieces that connect to one another. So when I go from my history to the interview, I usually have, I say, coming up, we're going to talk about where they all went, but here's an interview with one of the creators who helped make the show happen. And then I go into the interviews, little segues from sections if you're doing something with multiple segments in it or things. Some people like to use sound effects, little music cues to segue into it. I use a little bit of both. I use the spoken one with a music cue that takes you through to the next section. But the example here is now we know what Dr. Smith saw in his experiments, but Dr. Brown, he had other ideas, and then you roll Dr. Brown. That kind of linking effect works really well. People like being guided through, especially if they can't see anything. They're often imagining it in their heads, and so that kind of a little bit of hand holding works really nicely in an audio format. Interview tips. So there's two types of questions you can ask. You have closed and open. Generally, you want to avoid closed questions unless, of course, there's some particular reasons. So were you nervous on your first day? They're going to say yes, but they're going to say no. And it's not particularly interesting to listen to. But if you say, how did you feel on your first day? Then they'll expand and open up. Sometimes you can get interview subjects that are a bit standoffish, and you kind of have to really, it's almost like pulling teeth sometimes. And so open-ended questions are really good. Asking people to walk through a process. So say this person discovered a particular scientific discovery. Walk me through the day you found this. Might be a better way if they're just sort of, maybe not used to being interviewed. A lot of people can get a bit deer in headlights about it all, because especially if you send a microphone, you say and action, they just go, I don't know what I'm doing. And they get ham and they half. Avoiding paraphrasing. So would you say you were very nervous on your first day? And they're going, well, yes, it's almost like being a lawyer. You can't ask leading questions. Short questions, one at a time. This is why I have my notebook on the side for if I've got any follow-ups from some really cool piece of information they asked, or drop in the middle of their response. I'll say, oh, ask about this. And listening is a big important thing, because you can always, especially if it's an interview, you can always edit that down, what they say. So you're always better off to let them go on a little bit longer. Unless, of course, you've got like a time limit and you need to get to a certain question. But generally speaking, if they're going on longer, they're comfortable with going a little bit over the time you've allotted for the interview. So listening to them and letting them go on a little bit is often a way better strategy than trying to interrupt to keep them on topic. Because you can always edit it out, you can always make it shorter, but you can't put something in that you don't have. Maintaining eye contact. So if they're in the room, positioning your mic so you've got a nice view to them is also really good. Just on that note, what was I saying about interviewing? A good way to keep some people, especially if you get those deer in headlights people, they can be very, very nervous, and a good way to break the ice is with humor, I've found. So what I often do when we're recording videos up in the studio upstairs, and I've got someone who's seeming a little nervous, I have this one line. It's become a bit of a cliche for me now, but I always say, even Meryl Streep needs take two. And that usually gets them going, okay. It's not about getting it correct the first time. If you're running an interview and they sort of lose their place, just go back to the start of that thought there, and we can edit that out. Let them know that you can edit things out if they need it, and they're going to be a lot more calm about. They don't feel they have to get it right on the first go, because generally it's that pressure that'll do that, rather than they're experts. They know what they're talking about usually. So easing with humor, making them laugh a little bit, letting them know you can edit it out, can redo a take if you're not happy with it. It's about being happy with what you said, Copying your files to your computer, so file structure, I was talking about this before. Raw audio, sound effects, music, having all the little subfolders for all the little elements, especially if you're doing a really complicated piece. You've got your interview, you've got the music, you've got the solo bit, and you've got your artwork even for that particular episode. Having that all organized in a really nice file system you will thank your future you will thank you. You don't want to be exporting final version 3.5.1. It just gets insane. And then you can't remember which one's which, and then you have to put the wrong one up. I've put the wrong copy of something up and had to redo it. It's a pain in the butt. So using a USB cable rather than relying on Wi-Fi or cloud services. So this is talking about making sure that you've got the hard files is always very good. Maybe an SD card reader depending on your computer, and making backups. So if you've got all your files and you just have like a spare hard drive, audio files aren't particularly big, which is a really good advantage if you're backing things up. So just have a little hard drive there, it'll be a couple of gig. Just copy that over there. Once you've done editing your project, keep it on the side there. And if your computer dies, you've still got all of the raw files. But if you're uploading it to a particular platform, sometimes that platform will let you re-download the episode if you've lost it, depending on the platform you're going to. So yes, file management is key. Editing in Adobe Premiere or Adobe Audition, or a DAW is a digital audio workstation. Oh, sorry. A DAW is a digital audio workstation. That's just a fancy word for anything that edits audio. So people might have heard the word Pro Tools thrown around. A lot of music producers use that. Kontakt, there's all sorts of things, but it's just a DAW is a digital audio workstation. So generally you're importing anything you want to use into your project. If the file you have is a video, so Zoom will often come with a video, it doesn't just record audio, it has the video, that's fine. You can just take the audio, you don't have to worry about the video. And you can use the tools to trim sections, remove bad takes, reorder, tighten up, and all those fancy things. How am I doing on time?
You have 22 minutes.
22 minutes, okay. I'll do a really super quick walkthrough of Adobe. The learning curve on this application is very, it seems quite intimidating at first. We do have some links to some tutorials, so I'll go through this as quickly as I can. I'm just going to stop the share and I'm going to bring up, I'm going to share Adobe Premiere. Where are we? Can you see this?
Yes.
Beautiful. So when you open up Adobe, it's kind of going to look like this. And these days it gives you a bit of a option to set up your project, but that'll just be literally, it's like Microsoft Word, when you want to save your project, kind of like that opening screen. You have Adobe runs on there's a bunch of little windows that you're using, and you have your project, you have the monitor. So this window that I've highlighted here, this is where you're watching whatever you've edited. This is where all your files are that you're going to be using, and your timeline is where you're cutting them up and doing all your effects. And then this is for effect controls or source clips, which I'll show you in a minute. But I've just got some pre-recorded bits of audio here. I'm just going to import them. You can right-click. Oh, sorry. So right-click and import, or double-clicking in Premiere generally does that. Most audio workstations are going to have some form of this workflow. So even if you work on something a little bit more simple, like Windows Media, can't remember the name of it. It's a default section. Apple also has Apple Edit, not Final Cut. That's the expensive one. But anyway, these audio files are like this, and you can listen to any of them if you just double click on them. Now, I'm just going to make sure I can transfer my audio. Is my audio coming through? Where are we? Just see.
You can turn your audio on.
So if I keep playing, can you hear this? Wait.
No, you need to turn the audio on for Zoom. So if you just if you scroll across the top,
advanced sharing options.
Yeah, that should work as well.
You can share audio.
So above
here we go. Select a speaker. So
up where you've got the visuals of each person in
yeah.
If you scroll to yourself,
yeah,
and unmute yourself, and hopefully we don't get too much feedback.
Okay. Can you hear that? No.
No,
I think it's in the settings.
maybe it is too.
in the sharing settings, isn't it? It's like in the and sharing options. I'm just I swear there's always a way to share the audio.
Yeah, there is.
If you stop your share again and then go to share your screen, there's a little tick box that you can also.
Yes, thank you. And share sound. There we go. Beautiful. Thank you very kindly. Sorry. There we go.
Shane Anderson, and this is the Podcasting Podcast.
Right. There we go. A little funny, silly thing about podcasting. So you've got all these audio files.
And in this, our first episode, we're going to be examining. Not that much noise.
So that's a bit of a blooper, so I'll show you about cutting that out. And I think this is just more of the same.
Hello, my name's Shane Anderson, and welcome to welcome to the podcast.
Okay, so we've got our files that pretend they're going to be our important pieces. So what you can generally do is you want to bring it into the timeline. As you can see, it's sort of very self-explanatory. There's drop media here to create a sequence. So click and you drag it and you put it down and it's going to pop up there. Most editors will be like this. So Adobe has this is generally where they'll put the video, but we have this audio clip here.
Okay, it's recording, and this is take 1. Hi, my name is Shane Anderson.
Let's pretend that's where we want to go from. So you have all of this faff. A lot of editors are pretty intuitive and graphic user interface. So if you can see here, if I'm hovering over this clip, so this is my entire of my audio, I just can drag that like that, and then it's kind of gone.
What are the different lines?
The different lines of where some.
So like, why is the audio recording 2 lines or like?
So that's just the track. So you have different audio tracks. So say if you're going to put sorry.
I meant like one of the files is shown on the top left now.
Oh, sorry. Yes. That's just so this comes from the Rode Podcaster. So it will by default record a bunch of different channels. So for every microphone, and then it also has like its own mixed down versions of everything. So you can get the individual stream for each microphone or a pre-mixed down version of it. Versus this is just from, I believe, the Zoom recorder. So this will just record a standard stereo file. So depending on what device you're recording on, that'll sort of lay out differently. If you were on, sorry, where are we here? If you did have this sort of file here and you came here. I'm dealing with I'm just going to shrink this up a little bit so you can see a little bit more of, sorry, I'm not used to the trackpad. Yeah, so you can see a little bit more of this. So you've got this whole thing here. You can generally, you don't need everything, so you can, highlight all the ones you don't need and hit delete. And then you've just got the one.
Hello, my name's Shane Anderson, and welcome to.
But generally, most audio files will come in this sort of thing. It's just a stereo file. There's sound in the left ear, sound in the right ear. When you're recording on the Zoom recorder, the 2 little microphones at the top can act as left and right. So if you had something from this side, you had something on that side, they're listening. It'll play on either side of the ear. But anyway, to editing, so you've cut down. Like I was saying, there's like a graphic user interface aspect to it. So you can take the file, you can click and hold and drag it to wherever you need. You generally want stuff to start at the start. You list it.
Hi, my name is Shane Anderson, and this is the Podcasting Podcast. Hi.
So say we're very happy with that take. I want to cut it up. So if you're cutting something up in the middle, Adobe has a lot of these little tools here. Has anyone used Photoshop or various editors before? Has anyone used a video editor before? Yeah, okay. Again, this is very complicated stuff, so it's the Cliff's Notes version of it, but basically you have your tools there. There's a razor tool for cutting because they used to cut film strips with razors. But here it worked like this. If you click your razor tool, you see my mouse has changed. I want to cut there, and let's pretend I want to just then trim it to.
The podcast where we teach you podcasters.
That's the bit I want to cut to, so we don't need this bit in the middle. I cut there, go back to a mouse selection tool, select it, and just like before, I just hit delete, and there's a gap there. Now you don't want the gap there because that'll play with a gap. So what you can do in a lot of editors, you can highlight the gap, so just click on that and hit delete, and that'll bring everything forward. So it's the Cliff Notes version. I do apologize, it can get very, very technical.
My name is Shane Anderson, and this is the Podcasting Podcast. The podcast where we teach you podcasters how to do the
So now
best.
it's like a nice smooth edit. We've cut out all the faff. So generally you would cut everything to where you want it first, and then you want to do all your effects if there's any particular effects you want, whether that is cleaning up the noise, whether that is adding some special effects. If you're doing a narrative podcast, for example, people love, make things sound like they're in a different space. I'll give you a quick show of just the kind of things you can do under the effects panel here. You want audio effects. Down here, just as a basic thing that people would sort of understand, reverb is what makes things sound echoey. It makes a room sound like it's got a space. So I'm just going to slap on a really simple one here. In our effect controls, and I'm just going to tell it, I'm just doing this a bit, so what do we want? Judge's chamber, let's see. I'll just make this so that it'll sound quite obvious. So you can hear the regular audio.
Anderson, and this is the Podcasting Podcast. The podcast where we teach you podcasters how to do the best podcasting you ever podcast.
Now it sounds like I'm in another room somewhere. It sounds like I'm in this room. So you can do all sorts of different effects. You can pitch shift, changing the time, slowing things down. There's all sorts of cool things you can do and explore. But I'm just going to undo that effect. Oh, too far. Control Z works like it does in Word on these editors. Most editors will let you go Control Z, so you can see me undoing everything and then going back. Noise reduction, there's generally just a denoise. This is like a really simple one. Denoiser, you can click and drag. Again, clicking and dragging is a relatively sort of intuitive thing, and most editors will let you do it. So clicking and dragging a denoiser, and it'll have a bunch of settings on it. And you can generally, this looks all really complicated, but if you look, there's sort of like and this is all I ever use, is just this percentage here. So say I want to denoise it by 10%. And then that's it, and then it's been denoised.
The podcast where we teach you podcasters how to.
So I'll just show you, so if you're in a particularly noisy place and you've had to like really denoise the hell out of it, it does start to affect the audio. So I'm just going to show you like 100% version of this on my audio, and you'll notice that it sounds very muffled, it sounds distant, it's been taking a lot of chunks out of it. So
the podcast where we teach you podcasters how to do the best podcasting you ever.
Versus.
My name is Shane Anderson, and this is the Podcasting Podcast.
The denoises are such that, I guess in these speakers, you're not going to hear as much of a difference unless you're on the headphones. But especially if you've had to boost it up and then denoise it, it can start to take a lot of the information away from the voice. But generally you would have, let's pretend that's what you've edited, and that's you don't want any of that, just delete that. Then you want to export it. So in the example of this, you would just go File, Export. Now the great thing about Adobe is that they've sort of just recently changed a lot of their systems because they're very, they've just changed their systems to be very output specific. So if you can see here, Facebook, TikTok, Vimeo to X, YouTube, and you can often just like flip that setting on and all of it's by default on. It's just generally really quick to sort of set it here. But for example, we're just going to say, give me I want an MP3, just the common audio format, MP3, and all your settings are kind of going to be relatively what you want. A lot of the default settings are good for what most people need. you would, sorry, I just can't see my button here to come and think, export, and it will give you a little export. Let's just put it onto the desktop under podcasts and go on. Exports, here you go. Capture 208.
Hi, my name is Shane Anderson, and this is the Podcasting
And that's how it'll export.
Podcast.
So that's generally the very Cliff Notes version. You would put it in, you would edit it, you would add your effects, you would export it. And I'll always recommend to listen to your audio. It can be a little bit frustrating listening to your own voice. I know I don't like the sound of my own voice, but listening to it all the way through, because there will always be mistakes. I've been doing it for years and there's always mistakes. So you never want to be, you want to get that figured out before you put it online for the world to see. So real quick, that was walkthrough. Oh, can everyone see this? Oh, beautiful. Podcast platforms. So this is just the last little bit where you put it. So manually putting your podcast onto the internet, it takes a lot of know-how about like the back end of the internet and RSS feeds and some coding and all that kind of thing. But generally, most people can use a podcast hosting service. So usually there's a subscription fee between $5 and $50, depending on how much control you want over everything. They will organize it. Usually they just have a form when you say, upload this file, call it this, put this information here, put this information in, and they'll take care of everything. I do that. I'm on, oh, it's not here. I'm on, oh God, I've forgotten what it's called. On a particular cast. Acast, that's it, sorry, it's Acast. But I have a producer who he runs a network of a bunch of podcasts. So that's his preferred platform. But most people I know a couple of friends in Melbourne who just do their own, they're just on their own in their lounge room. And Buzzsprout is the go-to one. Everyone likes it. They have a really good system where they don't start charging until you started releasing your episode. So if you're trying to figure their system out, they're not charging you for that until you start releasing your episode. So it's one of the highest rated services. Everyone likes it. It's reasonably priced. But the pricier options will give you a little bit more flexibility, higher amount of uploads, bigger file sizes, that kind of thing. But those services will just put it onto Apple for you. They'll put it on everywhere for you. Some of them, the Acast platform that I'm on has like a little checkbox. You can say, I want it on here. Previously, when Google had podcasts, you could select that, and Google got rid of podcasts now. But a podcast platform is going to be the easiest, simplest way. It's how I do it, because the back end of actually doing it manually is just far too hard for me. So platform's really good. Buzzsprout, I can definitely recommend. I also use Acast, but here's a list of other ones.
Or can I just ask a question around that?
Yes.
Please, thank you. Just in terms of UQ's recommended hosting platforms, so if we're developing educational content,
Yep.
lectures and things, are we still okay to go with our IP through this way, or do we need to keep them separate and offline? Like, is there
Generally, if it's a student-facing thing and it's internal, you'll probably have to figure out another way. I know on the platform that we were using for the DLU, I've just completely blanked on the name of it. Extend. Sorry, on Extend we have to, because Extend doesn't take just audio files. So what we have to do when we get an asset that's audio, we have to upload it to YouTube just with like a video of like a waveform waving, and then put that onto Extend. But different platforms and all that sort of stuff will let you put audio files. I know there's Echo Video is another one that we've used, or that everyone sort of uses. We had to put that with the waveform video on. It's very platform dependent. These independent ones will be facing the public. So if you're making something that's public facing, these platforms will do it. But if it needs to be locked internally to YouTube, you kind of have to conform it to whatever the platform's limitations are. Whether that's attaching just a video of a waveform to it and then plugging that through. I believe there might be some assets you can pull from the what's the big pool of media called? Sorry, I'm just blanking on terms these days. The DAM.
Oh, the DAM.
Yes, the digital asset manager. There might be some assets there that you can pull just to put over it, even if it's just a still image. And then the audio is just playing over it. That might be a simple way of just getting it to work. And then they can hit play and then they can just put it in their pocket and listen to it if it's a student listening on the train or something like that. But yeah, internal stuff might be a little bit different, and each platform has its own very specific ways it likes to work. So it can be a little bit tricky navigating that. But if you ever have a question or whatever, if you're like, oh, we're going on to Blackboard Ultra, what can we do? Just shoot us an email and we'll be able to help you out. Yeah. This is the end of it. The podcast I listen to, this is the fun bit. My favorite podcast of all time is You Must Remember This. It's all a Hollywood history one. She's just got her new season now and I'm loving it. And then these two are my ones that I did. What I'm doing, I'm in the middle of that one. The other one on the left is since ended, although weirdly it's still very popular. Some links to resources. So when we send you this, there'll be some YouTube branded stings and audio levels loop using Arial font for all titles. So that actually might have audio levels loop. That might be the waveform video that I was referring to. I'll double check on that. I haven't looked at this in a little while. Adobe Audition tutorials there. Adobe Rush doesn't do audio only, but if you're doing a video section, Adobe Rush is a very, very user-friendly, very, very simple pared-down version of Premiere that everyone has access to. So that tutorial might help you there if you're doing a video component for your podcast. That's the attributions. So I'll send that through to you. Were there any other questions from anyone?